Good evening. We finally made it. The last time you'll have to hear me preach a sermon again. And some of you may think that's a good thing, some of you may think that's a sad thing, but whatever the case is, it's been a good 3.5 years here, and I will be around for another week. I have classes still to teach Wednesday, Sunday. I have something to do in the scripture song prayer service Sunday night. You haven't heard the last of me, but this is the last full half hour, 40 minutes that we have for a dedicated sermon. So, with that in mind, uh, what do you really preach about for the last time you speak to a group of people? What exactly do you go preach on? I had a few options. I thought about doing Romans 16, a letter where Paul ends off by greeting a bunch of people in the church and pointing out all their noticeable spiritual endeavors that they've gone to, and they've encouraged him and they've helped him in different ways. But I don't want to become an emotional wreck up here. So that idea is shelved, maybe later. I thought about Amos chapters 1 and 2, which would actually align with the scripture reading, but it's an excellent sermon. I put it together and then I shelved that one too. It's more of a rebuke sermon than anything, and there's no glaring issue that I'm leaving behind, so no real need for me to put that tone and then walk out the door, shall we say. And so I would invite you to turn back to Daniel chapter 1. I know we covered this in the scripture reading a couple weeks ago, and I know we covered this in class 2.5 months ago. And so, odds are, if you were in the Wednesday night adult class, you've heard most of the points that I'm going to make tonight. There's nothing particularly new about this, but I had to come back to it for sake of just the inclusion. On August 1st of 2022, I packed my bags from my parents' house in Kentucky, stuck them all in a car, and made a drive across the country, 55 hours by car for fun. Google Maps will tell you it's 30. It's lying. It's 55. And I came out here, made it out by August 5th, about 8 o'clock in the morning. Showed up here at the church building, ran across Mike and Talon in the office. Mike showed me around the building, introduced me to everything, and then I was on my own to finish assembling a sermon for Sunday night. Sunday night rolls around August 7th of 2022, the evening service, and I was expected to get up and preach a sermon, and so I preached something. I got a notebook, which is how I used to take my sermon notes, and I brought it up here, and I had you all open to Daniel chapter 1, and that's how we began, with not bad content, but shall we say, an unpalatable sermon, as it were. Hopefully, my organization's gotten a little better in the past 3.5 years. I've had some good teachers. And so here at the end, may as well wrap right around to the front. Again, it's not anything you haven't heard before, but hopefully it's done in a way that's memorable and helpful for you. It's fitting to end off with this kind of sermon. It's fitting to close with this because Daniel 1 drives home an eternal principle that we all just need to understand. Right from the opening phrases, the opening verses of this book is a picture of God's absolute sovereignty and rule. The picture of Daniel 1 is wherever you are, God's in control. Maybe you're in Jerusalem, maybe you're in Babylon. Guess what? Doesn't matter. God is king there. And so maybe you're in Santa Clara, or maybe you're moving away to Arizona. Man, didn't want to do that. Well, here we are. God's in control of you wherever you end up. And so wherever I might see you or not see you, God is still the king. And whatever happens in your life, God is the consistent one, even when humans aren't. You may not understand what he's doing. You may not always like what he's doing. But God's in control. And I'm glad to leave you with that kind of message. Daniel chapter 1. If I can read this, we'll get through it. Daniel 1, let's start reading in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with some of the vessels from the house of God. And Nebuchadnezzar carried them to the land of Babylon, to the house of his God, and put the vessels in the treasury of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility, young men without any physical defect, good looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. The king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend the king. And among them from the Judahites were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief eunuch gave them names. He gave the name Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. But Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. Now God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. What if he sees your faces looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So Daniel said to the guard whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. He agreed with them about this and tested them for 10 days. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink, and he gave them vegetables. God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding and every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. And at the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend the king. In every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them about, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and mediums in his entire kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. A familiar story and a familiar reading, especially if we covered this 2.5 months ago. You know what this picture is. But a lot of times we get caught looking at Daniel and examining Daniel and Daniel's actions. And as great as Daniel's actions are, this is a chapter to show you who God is. And that's the message that we'll leave with tonight. Here is how God works. You may not like it, you may not get it. And sometimes it's a little bit complicated, but here's a picture of how God works. 4 basic points that we'll cover this evening. One by one, just keep it simple. God is sovereign, God is silent, God is subversive, and God sustains. Those are your 4. We'll go through them one by one, starting with the first 2 verses. God is sovereign. You see history and theology and popular opinion all coming together in verses 1 and 2 to describe a historical event known as the fall of Jerusalem, or at least the first one, and the moment where Daniel and some friends get carried off into captivity. You have on the one corner King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who has just ascended to his father's throne and taken over. On the other hand, you have King Jehoiakim of Judah, who is also in charge of a nation, but it's a much less impressive one. These 2 men fight against each other. These two conflict and have a siege. And in the midst of that, you see who wins. It's verse 2. It's God. The Lord hands Jehoiakim, king of Judah, over into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar does not conquer Jerusalem. Make sure you get that straight. God gives Jerusalem into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Too many people, when looking at this event, would look at it from the physical point of view of 2 earthly kings fighting, and one of those earthly kings wins. But when you look at it from God's point of view, you realize there is one king, one sovereign, who has dictated which one will win in this instance. And no matter who wins on earth, the sovereign God rules in the end. There are 3 things that you should notice about how God rules in the realm of mankind. As you go through Daniel, you'll see all of these represented, but here, they're all here in the first 2 verses. Number 1, God is an active sovereign. He is not passive. He is not absent. Notice how God is involved here. It's the inconsequential conflict of two kings and a few men in their armies compared to the entirety of the world, and yet God has seen fit to rule in this instance. God has seen fit to touch the earth and to command the victory for one of them. God is involved in the inconsequential affairs here. How involved is he today with all those things that we think are so little? Too many people have this view of God that he created the world and then he just kind of backed off of it and waved goodbye and now is watching to see what happens, but he's not involved or he doesn't care or whatever the excuse is. Make no mistake. This is God's world, and God has not left it alone. It is sustained by his power actively. It is sustained through Jesus. The New Testament tells us God is active. Don't forget that. Even if it looks like he's not doing anything, the odds are is he's waiting for the right moment, like he always has. God is an active sovereign. Number two, you should know God is a faithful sovereign. Too many people would look at this instance. God is on the side of Jerusalem. They're his people. The Jews are his people, but then they're getting hauled off into captivity. Surely God must not care about them anymore. Or God's promises are broken, or they failed, or something has come in the way. And the answer is no. God did make promises, Deuteronomy 28, that if you were righteous and obedient, then you can stay in the land. But God also made promises, Deuteronomy 28, that if you were disobedient, you'd be taken away from the land. He is faithful to them. This is not a failure of the promise, this is a fulfillment of the promise. And whether God promises grace or judgment, he will fill it. Don't think he won't. God is active sovereign. God is a faithful sovereign. Third, you should know God is a humble sovereign. That seems like a weird point to make. But in verse 2, when God hands King Jehoiakim, king of Judah, over to Nebuchadnezzar, he also hands Nebuchadnezzar some of the things from his personal treasury. Think about how that would look from the outside. Babylon with Marduk as their godly sponsor, coming against Jerusalem with the Lord as their sponsor. And it seems like Marduk wins and even enters the temple of the Lord, raids his house and treasury, and carries it off to put it back in the treasury of Nebuchadnezzar's God. What God do you think is in control? If you were just to look at that picture, that God's willing to humble himself if it means proving a point to Israel. God could have intervened. He could have stopped Nebuchadnezzar, but he would rather suffer shame because he has a message to communicate, and he needed to wake the people of Israel up. You see this all over the place in the Bible. Standout moments for me, 1 Samuel chapter 4. The Israelites are going up to fight the Philistines. They've lost the first battle. They go up for a second battle, and they decide, instead of asking God for help, they decide to twist his arm and get his help anyway. Grab the Ark of the Covenant, take it out to battle with you. It's the throne of God. God would not abandon that or let that go away. And so God must step in and protect us. And what happens? 1 Samuel chapter 4. Israel gets massacred, and God's ark is taken away and put at the feet of the Philistine god. God would rather suffer shame than let people feel comfortable in their sin. And sometimes to wake people up, it means doing something absolutely terrible and letting them suffer. Sometimes God suffers too. The most famous version of this, of course, is Jesus going to the cross, not a proud way to die, not a glorious way to go. And yet he was willing to put aside his deity to come down here to adopt the humble mindset, God in the flesh, to come and die for us, die as a criminal. God's willing to suffer shame to wake people up to the reality of their situation, which is if you have sinned, you are responsible, you are guilty. And God has to sacrifice some things to make that right. God's kingship over us is not one where he is aloof or absent. It's not one where he is just doing his own thing. It's one where he is fulfilling his promises and humbling himself to serve the least of us. Why should you submit to God? Well, because he humbled himself first. God is sovereign, involved in the world, working in it, working on it, and with his people. Don't forget it. the Lord handed Jehoiakim, king of Judah, over to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And so Nebuchadnezzar takes over. Well, God is sovereign. He's the king. He's the one in charge. He is the one who is the force behind the throne. And so we've seen that he's there. We've seen that he's active. And when you get to Babylon, you would expect that God starts doing something, but he doesn't. Not exactly. When you look at verses 3 through 14, you see a moment of time where God is silent. And it makes an interesting parallel. When we look at the Old Testament, sometimes I find myself thinking, well, God was talking to people in these days, so they were consistently hearing his word, and they heard straight from God all the time. How many words does God say in Daniel chapter 1? It's none of them. You can see him acting retrospectively. You can see him acting. As we read the account of Daniel, we read about the things that God does, but we never see him actually speak. This is not a moment where God is whispering in Daniel's ear, sitting on his shoulder, guiding him through beat by beat. This is a moment where God has left Daniel, it seems. And Daniel has to do his best with the things that he knows to make his individual decisions and try to maintain his faith. God doesn't whisper to me about all the solutions to my problems. If a neighbor comes to me with an issue, God doesn't tell me if it's a valid critique or not. If there's a spat in the family of whatever, God doesn't solve those problems for me. But he's given me principles with which I can learn, with which I can use them in the world to try my best to be faithful. And you see it as Daniel's in Babylon. Babylon lays out these new rules for the Israelites. New education, new food, new names, new culture, a new luxury that these people haven't had before, just a new identity to replace what they had and change it out with something else. Babylon is setting expectations. The word in verse 7, the chief eunuch gave them names. He set them names, or he assigned them names, depending on your translation. But then you go to verse 8, and you see that Daniel determined, or Daniel set himself, or Daniel assigned himself, that he wouldn't listen to the eunuch. Because there are some issues, there are some things that Babylon expects from Daniel that Daniel cannot give. And so Daniel resists it. You notice he clings to his original name. The chief eunuch gave the name Belteshazzar to Daniel, but Daniel set himself to ignore it. And he's consistently called Daniel throughout the book. You notice that the chief eunuch sets food for Daniel, but Daniel resists it. He asks the chief eunuch for freedom from that food, to not defile himself with that. And even when the chief eunuch says no, Daniel goes and finds another way anyway. Those are things unacceptable to the people of God. I don't know why. It never says why. The point of Daniel 1 is not to figure out why the food was unclean, or what that meant, or why he had an issue with it. That's not the point. The point of Daniel 1 is God has not spoken, but Daniel can make faithful decisions anyway. When you go in life and God does not speak direct in your ear for all your problems, don't be surprised. That's how he's operated for most people for most of time. But he's given you principles that you can live by. Daniel lives out Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Don't be conformed to the world. Okay, he's not. He's not like the rest of the young men who give in to the temptation of Babylon. He's not like the rest of the Babylonians. He doesn't convert and become just a Babylonian. He stays faithful to God. He doesn't want to become a Babylonian. There's nothing good about being a Babylonian. And even though he never pushes back against the education or learning their mythology, you can tell from later on in chapter 6 and in chapter 9, he's literally reading the prophet Jeremiah. As much as he's educated in Babylonian mythology, he's educating himself on the Lord's truth. Even when God doesn't speak directly, you know what's righteous. And God has expectations that you follow through on it. I don't know exactly why he decided the food was a bad thing. It could be a dietary restriction. It could be a religious restriction. It could be a symbolic maneuver or just a defensive stance. We don't get the answer for that. All we know is Daniel acted to keep his conscience clean, and God respected and appreciated that. Which you can tell when you see point number 3. God is subversive. What does that mean? It starts in verse 15. Daniel and his friends have agreed to a test, a 10-day testing period in which they will eat vegetables and water instead of the king's rich foods and the wine which the king drank. The point of the test is to fatten these people up. Back in the old days, fat wasn't a derogatory thing or an insult. It was a proof that you were not malnourished. Nebuchadnezzar wants to show that he can provide for all these people. He wants to fatten these guys up. And so Daniel attempts to fatten himself. How would you do that? Would you eat vegetables and water or meats and cakes and wines? Which one would you do? Which one works to fatten you up? When God decides it's vegetables and water, it's vegetables and water. God takes the natural elements of the world and tweaks them to use them as he wills. If he created them, he can change the rules. God subverts expectations. This is always how God works. He takes something and he makes it into something better. He takes these four men, eunuchs now, exiles, taken, stripped away from their families, from their old religion, from their way of life. They have been taken over into a Babylonian camp where they have been re-educated forcibly to make them into Babylonians. And God takes these prisoner slave exiles and he makes them into the leaders of the kingdom and the advisors of the king. They are tested for 10 days. At the end of that, the king finds them 10 times better. However much they went through to get there, God blessed them in proportion. And God has made them wise beyond anything that they deserve. Daniel even understands all kinds of visions and dreams. That'll be really useful in chapters 2 and 4 and 7 through 12, just the rest of the book. God takes that which looks like it's defeat and turns it into victory. God takes that which looks like it's little and unimportant and insignificant and makes it something worthwhile. God always does this. Taking failure and turning it into success, or should I say, taking what to us looks like failure and turning it into success. Remember the story of Joseph. Joseph tries to help his brothers, ends up a slave. Joseph tries to help Potiphar, ends up in prison. He tries to help the cupbearer, ends up still in prison. And it's only after a number of years and all these different instances of trying to do the right thing and doing the right thing and being punished for it that finally at the end, he ends up being the second in command of Egypt. God takes what looks like failure, but Joseph says God meant that for good. And it happened at just the perfect time. Jesus is the perfect example of that. When God sends down a Messiah, people are expecting that he's going to lead them in a glorious victory against the Romans, that he's going to be this military leader or a civic figure, someone who's going to take over politically. That's not what Jesus is about at all. There's a reason why when Jesus dies, he has 11 followers and they're all hiding in a room. But God takes that which looks like failure, and it's through that instance that salvation is offered to everyone. Don't be surprised when God takes things that look like failure or a downturn or a setback of whatever kind and turns them into something good. We've lived here for 3.5 years, and over that time, I've seen a lot of people come and go. And even on a good year when the evangelism is really working and we're converting a bunch of people and we have people moving in, it seems like we have just as many people moving out. And the attendance doesn't seem to go up, and that can be disheartening. But God takes that which looks to humans like failure, and that's a success. Did you know that having a church meet here, a group of faithful people in the Silicon Valley, that's a success? You know, when the secular world is against you, and when the pagan religions of all the other places in the world are all funneling into one moment, all funneling into this one area, it's a success that there are faithful Christians here. Don't get disheartened, though the world looks like it's against you, and it feels that way so often. Don't judge the spiritual value based on your physical circumstances, because humble circumstances with God are a whole lot better than high circumstances if you're on your own. I would rather be in the faithful group of 20 than in the unfaithful group of 1,000, because one of those has God on its side. Don't mistake human failure for success. The last point of all is found in verse 21. God's changed all the situation. He makes the bad into something good. And finally, here you see the picture. And verse 21 is excellent. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. What does that mean? Well, Cyrus is the king of Persia. Persia, the nation that destroys Babylon, gets rid of it and replaces it. See, there's a temptation to look to the kingdom of Babylon and see its incredible power and see its incredible might. It conquers everyone. It conquers everyone, including Israel. Even God's people are taken under its wing. There would be such a temptation to convert to Babylon and to just become a good little Babylonian, to listen to its laws and do its things and heed its decrees and become one of them. But at the end of the day, before Daniel's life is even gone, Babylon has fallen and been replaced with something else. Daniel, can you imagine how different this story would have been if Daniel just went along with everything Babylon did in the first chapter? When Babylon is removed, Daniel would get removed too. But Daniel was not conformed to Babylon. Daniel remained unspotted from the world, as the New Testament would say. And when the world passes away along with its lusts, God's people remain. God sustains because he's always there. And he brings his people through whatever it is they face. The kingdom that Daniel is shown in later chapters, the kingdom that Daniel gets to be a part of, is a kingdom without the limits of God, of humans, because it is under the rule of the Lord. And he does not age, and he does not die, and he does not leave, because God is there forever. Whether you are in Jerusalem or whether you are in Babylon, God is there, and he's consistent. And that's why you're supposed to have faith in him. When we're told don't be conformed to the world, a lot of times we think that's just about the physical earth. Don't be a sinner, That's what we equate that statement to. That's true. It's true. Don't be a sinner. God doesn't approve of sinners. I think that's pretty obvious. But it's more than that. Don't be conformed to the humans. Don't just be another human. Don't rely on the same things that humans rely on. That's unsteady. If it's made of the things of man, it is unsteady. There's a reason God did not found our faith or the truth. He didn't found any of this on us. Let God be your foundation. That's the one that sticks. Your leaders will change. Your nations will change. Your situations will change, and the people around you will change. Because humans always change. Sometimes we're there, and sometimes we're not. But that doesn't change who's in control. And so as we leave off tonight, whatever it is you do, and wherever it is you go, and wherever it is I get to see you next, just know this. It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. Better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in nobles. God is the one who will not disappoint. God is the one who will not disappear. So trust in him. If there's anything we can do to shore you up in faith in him, then let me know. You know me, I'll be standing right here as we all stand and sing this song together.